Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. More than a third of the world's food crops rely on pollination. But across the country and in our own backyards, pollinator populations, particularly native bee populations, are dropping. In Vermont, there's an effort underway to help pollinators survive and thrive. Rebecca Gollin has the story.
There's a buzz in the air about pollinators.
Honeybees are definitely a very significant pollinator. They were introduced with a colonist in the late 1600s, and they still are very significant pollinators for the whole United States. Do the work for you.
Jean Sorensen knows about pollinators. A former landscape architect, Sorensen now farms and teaches University of Vermont students how to incorporate plants and features that attract pollinators into their designs. She remembers when insects and bugs were thought of as a nuisance rather than beneficial.
And anecdotally, anyone who's maybe over 50 can remember that when you would stop at a gas station, and the gas stations at that point were all full service. And the first thing the person would do after they put the gas nozzle in your tank is they'd wash your window. And we rarely wash our windows, and you had to wash your window because it was coated with dead insects. We don't have nearly as many insects as we used to.
Sorensen always used native plants in her landscape designs, and when it became clear that pollinators were in trouble, she decided it was time to do more.
I started thinking, well, I wonder how I can fit into this. I'm no longer practicing landscape architecture, but as a farmer and a person who sells plants, how can I get involved and be of any help? And I thought, well, I can add more plants and I can get myself a little bit more educated maybe and give talks and teach at UVM.
Vermont is home to a variety of pollinators, from birds and bees to butterflies and wasps. Bees are the most important contributor, and their decline has been the most drastic. There's not one single reason behind the drop in numbers, but factors include pesticide use, disease, and an increasingly fragmented landscape.
So we've got pesticide pressure, but the other huge pressure is habitat. And so as we continue to develop the land, we're reducing our pollinator habitat.
A new program in the state is growing to meet the challenge.
It's estimated that about 1/3 of everything we eat and about 3/4 of all plant crops rely on pollinators.
And she's also Jess Hyman is the executive director of the Vermont Community Garden Network. She's working with the Intervale Center in Burlington and the national organization kidsgardening.org to get the project going. It's called Wild for Pollinators, and the ideal participant is everyone.
Our hope with Wild for Pollinators is to dramatically increase the amount of pollinator habitat around the state. And this can happen in big swaths of land and also in little patches. So if everyone who owns, every homeowner, every community garden, every school garden, every business, every farm, if everyone who has the ability to preserves a little bit of space for pollinators, it's going to make a huge difference.
Participants receive information, seeds, and signs for their gardens. In return, they sign a pledge to either leave some land unmowed or establish a pollinator-friendly plot. There are resources for teachers and individuals, and the group maintains a display garden in Burlington. Hyman enlisted UVM Food Systems intern Lily Myers to help get the program started.
My big thing is really just trying to get people to be aware of this issue, because it really is, I think, one of the largest issues of our time is this need for pollinator conservation.
Myers spent months developing the website and working out the logistics of the program. While Vermont is the target audience, participants from out of state are welcome. The hope is that seeing signs in a neighbor's yard will raise awareness throughout the community and get people talking about what else they can do.
I'll send out little blurbs to the different participants and kind of give them ideas of what else they can do to get involved with pollinator conservation, or how can they build community and how can they educate their neighbors about this. So my ideal person would be someone who wants to put their site up in their front yard, and then anytime anyone asks about it, they can give them some information and tell them, oh yeah, well this is the program, it's Wild for Pollinators, and it's really important because of the declining pollinator populations, and then kind of building conversation and community around that.
Those conversations might just be the key to keeping Vermont's landscape working for pollinators.
So we're in a good place to be able to say, hey, before it's too late, let's pay attention. What can we do in our development patterns? And when we do develop, what can we do with our development to make sure that we're creating habitat, not just for pollinators, but for all the organisms?
It's a new initiative that's already attracting a buzz. And its organizers hope that it continues to grow in Vermont. In Burlington, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
For more information on the Wild for Pollinators program, visit the website that's listed on your screen. It's kidsgardening.org. Research shows that native pollinators prefer native plants. We recently met a gardening author whose book details how to mix and layer plants to create an environment that's reflective of nature.
Why plants are important to us and our future, and how we can have a positive impact on nature and plant in tune with nature are subjects of the book Planting in a Post-Wild World. Hi, I'm Leonard Perry with the University of Vermont. I'm fortunate today to have the author of this book with us, Claudia West. Thanks so much, Claudia, for being with us.
Such an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I guess the first question I have is the title of the book. It says Post-Wild World. What is that?
Yeah, so in post-wild, we don't mean that wildness is gone. Every weed that comes up in your garden tells you that wildness will always be there. It's a natural resource. What we mean is the fact that about 25 years from now, 75% of all people will live in cities. We have very few spaces left in nature on the planet where deep and rejuvenating plant communities grow that balance the effects we as a civilization have on the planet. So wildness doesn't exist that much in nature anymore, which is why it is so important for us to bring it back into our gardens, because quite honestly, this is where large parts of our future nature will be at home and will live, right there in our front yards, maybe even our container plantings on top of terraces.
And it can be as simple as having plants that provide insects for the birds or pollinators. Is this right?
Yes, that's a really, really important point. Plants are the foundation of life. They produce much of the oxygen we all breathe in, and ecological plants are the foundation for insects that eat them, and then birds who come in later to eat the insects. So for us it is extremely important to bring these plants back to make sure our planet and we as a species have a bright future ahead of us.
So in your book you give you go into depth. What are some of these concepts, how we can plant in tune with nature and ecology?
So there too, I think natural plant communities are the greatest inspiration for us gardeners. Nature is the best model, so we can learn an incredible amount from how plants already grow in natural settings and translate that into our own small or large garden spaces. And one of the primary principles is that plants in the wild cover ground. You hardly find any bare soil anywhere. When you go on a hike somewhere, you will find plants covering even the most difficult spaces. Sometimes they cover bare rock. So in a garden, that means that plants should never be replaced by mulch long term. You should always have a dense, thick carpet of species, maybe one on top of the other, in your garden to provide not only incredible beauty, but also plant a salad bar for insects and a sponge garden that soaks up the rain and puts the water right back where it needs to be, back in the ground to rejuvenate or replenish our groundwater.
And I think, by choosing the right ground cover plants that cover the ground, that's going to keep the light from getting to the ground, which is going to keep those weed seeds from germinating. Is that?
You're absolutely right. Plants, again, are the best mulch on earth, and they are so good at suppressing some of the weeds that we constantly battle in our gardens.
Well, I know in your book, too, you have some pictures of layers, and I assume this is the one layer, and what's above that?
Yeah, so you can almost think about it like a lasagna or like a layered cake, where you have ground covers at the bottom and then show your species right on top of that. That creates spectacular flower moments and your emotional moments in your garden. That's that second layer. And then on top of that, we usually use either trees, shrubs, or tall perennials to build the framework or backbone of your planting. So we have 3 key layers: structural, theme plants, and ground covers that make the garden of the future, that has that incredible beauty and wildlife value.
So I think, looking at one of these, it looks like you have just a few of those structural plants that you put in first, maybe.
Yes.
And then a lot of that color, right, for the different seasons of color, and then finish it off with all that ground cover.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah. So that's exactly right. And we want to make sure that all of these 3 layers, plants, are balanced in this. So we don't have too many structural plants unless you're creating a screen, right? So you don't want to see your neighbor or some kind of infrastructure. Then you can use a large number of structural plants. But normally, to make the garden incredibly legible and beautiful, we try not to use more than 10% of structural species.
So that's a great
design.
tip. I know there's many others in your book. What are a couple other tips people might find in your book?
So plant more plants is probably the key ingredient of the gardens of the future. Make sure that mulch doesn't replace your plants. You should only really use it at the beginning of a planting temporarily, but then aim for covering soil densely with ecological plants that have all of these great benefits. In order to do this, it's really helpful to use smaller container sizes. It's much more difficult to plant dense ground cover with 3 gallons, but maybe quartz or landscape plugs could be the solution, or even seed if you want to play with that. And then, when you plant these gardens, it's important to think about plants not only as pretty ornaments, but understand that if they have ecological value, meaning if insects eat the leaves or if insects drink the nectar in the flowers, you can bring all that beautiful life right down in your, terrace or in your front yard garden and increase your gardening experience even more.
Well, great, Claudia. Thanks so much for a few minutes today sharing some of these. I really look forward to really getting in depth and reading these in your book.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Leonard, and our thanks to author Claudia West for taking the time to visit with us. Our final segment today highlights the Alumni House at the University of Vermont. The Alumni House is a former fraternity. It now hosts business and special events and is a home away from home for UVM alumni, parents, and friends.
I'm excited that after a decade in the planning, we've actually opened the doors to a new home here on campus for all the graduates of the University of Vermont. We want the building to be a home that you feel comfortable walking in the front door. So as you enter the front door of the Alumni House, you're going to be greeted by a UVM student ambassador who will welcome you back to campus and point you in the right direction, whether that be a meeting you're attending or a comfortable sofa to read the paper.
What has this process been like?
The university acquired the building from the Delta Psi fraternity in the mid-2000s, and since that point we've been developing plans and fundraising to make the renovation possible. The fraternity treated it pretty well, but it did require us to do a complete renovation from mechanical, electrical systems all the way from ground to ceiling, including some exterior work. We are thrilled that there are a lot of local craftsmen that put blood, sweat, and tears into this renovation process and did so with passion. That really, as you look around the house, you'll see the attention to detail is just extraordinary on the wood carvings, the stained glass windows, the light fixtures throughout the home have been completely restored by Conant Metal and Light here in Burlington. That touch of detail is really what separates this building from others.
And it is now with my great pleasure to ask you to join me in thanking once again those terrific lead donors.
When did it open officially, and what's the reaction been?
We officially opened on Thursday, September 22nd, and the reaction has been overwhelming. For folks that have been in the building prior to the renovation, they're just in awe at how far the building has come. For people that are stepping in the front door for the first time, they're just blown away by the historic fabric of the house and the uniqueness of the building that we have here on campus.
Do you have any anecdotes or stories from the opening that people shared with you?
My favorite story is we have an alum back from the class of 1938 who was 100 years old. He was getting ready to celebrate his 101st birthday. He came in the front door and said, "I'm home." And not only is it going to be a home for alumni, it's going to be a vibrant special event space. So within the historic main home itself, we have nearly a dozen spaces that can be reserved for small to larger functions, and then we've added a new special events pavilion onto the house that accommodates much larger events. The response has been tremendous. We've had neighbors actually reach out to us wanting to host family gatherings here at the house. But we've also worked with the Convention Bureau and a lot of the local event planners because it is sort of a unique facility here in the Hill section in Burlington.
You can find out more information about the Alumni House online, or you can call the university. That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.